Golden Spoon is one of the city's most celebrated fine dining establishments. It is a space defined by high costs and months-long waitlists, where a heavy brass door swings shut against the street outside to maintain an air of complete separation. This environment relies on manufactured exclusivity. In this model, a brand's value is derived from who it prevents from participating. The more difficult it is to get a table, the more valuable that table becomes to those who finally secure one. Over time, this philosophy alters the psychology of the staff. Front-of-house employees stop acting as hosts and begin acting as gatekeepers. Their primary task is to scan every arrival for the specific markers of wealth and status that signal they belong inside. When a business fixates on its own prestige, it views anyone without the proper social signaling as a threat to the brand's curated image. The presence of a wrong guest risks breaking the immersion for the paying clientele. On a Thursday evening, that immersion was broken. An elderly man walked through the grand entrance wearing mismatched shoes and a worn, patched coat. He approached the host stand and asked for a table for one, requesting dal makhani. The floor manager, Karan, relied on his training to make an instant judgment. He moved to usher the man back toward the door, assuming he was a vagrant who had wandered in off the street, and pointed him toward a shelter 3 blocks away. The dining room fell quiet as diners stopped their meals to watch the scene. Some whispered with amusement, while others looked on with visible discomfort, as the man in the threadbare coat stood perfectly still under the modern chandeliers. The man refused to leave. He spoke calmly, explaining that he only wanted a quiet meal, and noting that the dish he requested was the first item this restaurant ever served. Karan viewed this persistence as stubbornness and gestured for security. At that moment, the restaurant's systems were working exactly as designed, mechanically removing an outlier to protect the dining experience of the wealthy. Karan's response was the logical conclusion of the restaurant's culture. He was enforcing the exact boundary he had been hired to maintain, protecting the Golden Spoon image from someone who appeared unable to pay for it. The situation stopped when Rohan, the restaurant's CEO, stepped out of his office and sharply raised his hand to halt the security team. He had recognized the man in the patched coat from across the room. The power dynamics in the room shifted instantly as Rohan bypassed his manager and greeted the man as Papa. This was Devraj Malhotra, the founder of Golden Spoon. As his identity rippled through the dining room, the staff and patrons realized they weren't watching a vagrant being removed, but the man who had built the building they were sitting in. This chart maps the current state of Golden Spoon's priorities, showing a focus heavily skewed toward prestige. The data shows what happens when a guest brings zero financial value to the table. The willingness to provide hospitality collapses entirely. Devraj's presence exposed a flaw in the business. Dignity had become a commodity that was only granted to those who could prove they had earned it at the door. Devraj focused on the decision Karan made when he believed he was dealing with someone of no importance. He addressed the lack of empathy required to publicly humiliate a stranger based solely on their appearance. He asked his manager a question that required no data to answer. If I really had been a poor man looking for a meal, would tonight have gone any differently? To understand why this mattered, look at the restaurant's growth trajectory, starting 15 years ago at a single, humble location. Expanding this early view reveals the empire's foundation, a high volume of small meals served to day laborers, the very demographic Karan just attempted to remove. The luxury empire had reached a point where it was actively rejecting the very people and the very dish, the dal makhani, that had allowed it to exist in the first place. Instead of firing Karan, Devraj required the entire front-of-house staff to work a shift at a community kitchen he funded on the other side of the city. This put the staff in a different physical reality. Waiters in crisp uniforms were now passing steaming bowls of food across metal counters to elderly men who had no status to offer in return. Devraj was betting on proximity. He believed that the distance created by fine dining had made the staff forget the humanity of the people outside their doors. Karan spent 12 hours serving meals and listening to the life stories of men who shared the same worn appearance as the founder. This direct interaction challenged his assumptions about who deserved a seat at a table. A policy memo cannot fix a culture of exclusion. Only a direct confrontation with the people a brand has been trained to ignore can force a change in behavior. Devraj made this change permanent. One night every week at every Golden Spoon location is now reserved for a free community meal, served with the same care and the same service standards as any other night. The CEO initially worried this would dilute the brand. He feared that by removing the velvet rope, the restaurant would lose the aura of exclusivity that drove its high prices. The public responded differently. The restaurant's reputation grew because people are often weary of exclusivity for its own sake. They saw a perfectly set table with a simple bowl of dal makhani as a return to something genuine. Devraj still visits unannounced in his old coat. Now, however, the staff offers the same quiet service to a man in mismatched shoes as they would to any other guest. A brand is not sustained by the height of its walls. It is sustained by the way it treats the people with the least power to demand its respect.